Hey everyone, welcome to the Sex, Bodies, and Cinema podcast. I'm Jason Good, one of the co-hosts of the show, along with Ashley Rose. This podcast takes a close look at films that explore sexuality and embodiment, with the aim to make space for what is, for many of us, a taboo subject. I'm a former screenwriter and director, and Ashley is a former actor. Both of us now work in the field of somatic sex education. You can find out more about Ashley and her work at ashleyelizabethrose.ca. You can find me at somarelating.ca. There you will find my hidden relationship patterns quiz that will help you identify some of the issues we often discuss in these episodes. It's free with your email, and you'll receive a personalized ebook that unpacks what came up for you and offers suggestions for improving how you show up in relationships. Go to the show notes and click on the link to take it today. In today's episode, we discuss Sarah Polley's 2011 film Take This Waltz, starring Michelle Williams, Seth Rogen, Luke Kirby, and Sarah Silverman. It's about a happily married woman, played by Williams, who falls for the artist who lives across the street, played by Kirby. You'll find links in the show notes pertaining to some of the topics covered. Without further delay, here is our episode on Sarah Polley's film, Take This Waltz.
Slept on the floor.
Life has a gap in it, it just does.
Between spears,
You don't go crazy trying to fill it.
tears falling steady.
Take This Waltz. How's it seeing the trailer there?
This movie has such a beautiful atmosphere around it and a type of magic that Sarah Polley was able to create. And it felt emotional, actually, and sentimental. It feels like watching down on someone's life as they're at a crossroads and having a bit more perspective than the characters do when they're in the middle of everything. So it's touching. How about you?
Yeah, I find this movie always emotional when I see it. I don't think I'd actually watched the trailer before, so I thought it accurately portrayed the tone, the feeling of the movie, which trailers don't often do.
This is indie, though. I think it had they didn't do a theatrical release.
I'm aware of one in Canada, but I don't know of one.
They didn't do it immediately. And Sarah Polley was talking about how that can be really disappointing for filmmakers initially because you think that, there's not really like a gala around it. She's like, but it's just so practical to be able to do the films that you want to do and self-produce, and for the financial element to just release it.
So this is Sex, Bodies, and Cinema podcast. I'm Jason.
I'm Ashley.
This is a podcast about films that tackle the subjects of sexuality and embodiment. It's a conversation show where we'll unpack the films from our own perspective as both former artists and practicing somatic sex educators. Today's film is Sarah Polley's 2011 film, Take This Waltz. It stars Michelle Williams, Seth Rogen, Sarah Silverman, and Luke Kirby. It's about a happily married woman, played by Williams, who falls for the artist who lives across the street, played by Kirby. So this is Sarah Polley's second feature. She did Away From Her quite a few years before this, like 5 years before, which got a couple of Oscar nominations, one for Julie Christie and one for, I think, her for a screenplay. And I found it interesting that it took her this long to make a movie after that, because when you're an indie filmmaker, you make a really lovely, touching movie like Away From Her, you can get work pretty quickly after that. So she clearly just wanted to do her own thing. And her follow-up was another Canadian Telefilm Canada funded film. And those people who don't understand what that means is, in most countries outside of America, there is what's called soft money or soft investment in films coming from the government and other sources to help create domestic storytelling, because it's almost impossible. It is impossible to compete with the Hollywood system. So a filmmaker in Canada will get a seed investment, a large investment from Telefilm Canada to support and get their movie financially off the ground. And this is one of those movies. But again, when you have an Oscar-nominated movie that stars Julie Christie, you usually can get a film made in Hollywood after that. So she chose not to do that.
Yeah, she's an interesting cat.
She truly is. Sarah Polley, what's your relationship to her as an actress, as a director?
Wrote to Avonlea when she was small.
Yes. Were you the target audience for that show?
I was the target audience for many shows. I watched a big variety of things. I did like Rotan on Me. I was a very Anne of Green Gables obsessed person, and my mother read me everything. But I never took a shine to her until My Life Without Me. I didn't have anything against her. I just didn't know enough of her. And when I saw My Life Without Me, I was so touched. I loved her. I loved Scott Speedman, who I'd never seen before. Mark Ruffalo was a bit newer on the scene than he is now.
I forgot he was in that movie.
Wow. And I just love that film. It was so touching. Of course, a lot of what she's in is a bit depressing. Sarah Polley's good at like the deep and...
Sad girl?
Yeah, sad girl. Doesn't seem like she is as a person, but she can really get into the melancholia and maybe the nostalgia of life. Yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia around her films.
Yeah, I'm thinking I never watched Avonlea, even though the Megan Follows Anne of Green Gables was huge for me. Even as a young boy, I loved that miniseries.
Yes, me too.
And I've watched it many times with my kids. I guess The Sweet Hereafter she was in.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
have seen her in that, The Hanging Garden, Last Night, like some, classic Canadian films. I know a lot of people in America would have been introduced to her with Go, but I don't actually think I've seen Go. And then, yeah, My Life Without Me was when she popped for me as well. Dawn of the Dead, the Zack Snyder movie, I saw her in that. And another show was John Adams, which was the HBO miniseries directed by Tom Hooper. And I was a big Tom Hooper fan, so I watched all of that. And she was really excellent in that. That would have been my connection to her. And then I saw Away From Her and was quite moved by that film. When did you see this film? Like, how did it come up on your radar?
We picked it because of some of the content and because it was Canadian content, just to throw it in the mix. And I started watching it and I was like, oh, I've watched this before, because I was excited to see that she was doing, I wanted more of her. And the first time that I saw it, I think I was touched and charmed. Touched and charmed, but it didn't land with me the way it did now. Yeah, I don't know whether it's being 42. I'm not sure when I saw it, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So even in that span of time, it landed with me differently. Was this your first time seeing it?
It wasn't the first time I've seen it. I saw it at a gala screening at the Vancouver International Film Festival in 2011. So I was an emerging filmmaker is the title they would give you back then. So I directed some short films and had some feature films in development. And so here is Sarah Polley, this, lauded Canadian indie director. This is her second feature. And so myself and my partner at the time went to the gala screening, the Vancouver premiere for it. And it just devastated us. We were wrecked. So we would have been together for 13 years at that point. So this is my ex-partner who I'm now divorced from. And we just kind of like walked out of it completely emotionally just distraught.
Oh, wow. Okay, paint me the picture. Are you crying? Are you just silent?
I definitely cried. She definitely cried. And it's a very specific memory because we live in the suburbs. We're in Vancouver. We're driving home and I just did not want to talk about it. And the local football team was in a playoff game. So I turned on the radio to listen to the playoff game.
Good, yes. Distraction.
And she's like, I need to unpack this film with you. And I'm like, not available. And we just didn't have language for like how to deal with that well. So it turned into a big fight.
Oh my gosh. What do you think was hitting you? Now you've got in retrospect and with perspective.
Yeah, there's a couple of themes that really hit me. I imagine some different ones probably then, given the context. So I'm always struck by films that invite you just to face yourself and your own, in a sense, solitude in the world, even with connection. But ultimately, you have to reckon with yourself and both the sacredness and the terror of ordinary life.
Well said.
That's
not the quotidian.
Yeah, that's what movies like that do tend to like prick the emotions for me. So all that to say, it was a significant film, but I think I had avoided it. I don't think I'd watched it since then. And when we were looking for people to cover, I realized, there's of course so much to unpack in this movie. Why don't we give it a try?
Yeah.
And this, I think, was my second time viewing it. So it was interesting, of course, to watch it through the lens, having seen it before with someone who I've split up with, and now to see it now. It was a different experience, but I did admire the film just as much.
Was it as emotional for you or what?
Not as much, but I definitely experienced some emotion for sure at different points. Yeah. I certainly had more tools to like understand what I might say to that couple, what I might say to the Michelle Williams character, the Seth Rogen character, like if they were a client or just that's right.
Checking your own philosophies.
I think there was some, if I was working with them, there's some ways to avoid the impending disaster. And so being able to see it through those eyes allowed me to process the film. Whereas I think 13 years ago, I wouldn't have had those tools and I wouldn't know what to do with what they were wrestling with.
Absolutely.
So Seth Rogen is in this movie, obviously the opposite. We'll talk about Michelle Williams in a moment here, but I was curious what you thought about Seth Rogen's casting in this.
I thought it was great. I think people should be able to be free to enter different pools of cinema that they haven't ordinarily done. And I loved him in it. And I loved the fact that he chose to do it. I'm not sure how that came about, but I'd love to know the history of it. How about you?
Yeah, I don't know what the story would have been with casting him, but he for sure probably got this movie made. I mean, given that she could have probably gotten the movie made at a lower budget, but he probably would have brought the financing up higher. So
Michelle.
At that point, I would have said Seth Rogen. I could be wrong there, but that would be my impression. And I mean, of course, they're both stars and what I'm trying to get at is when you make a Canadian film, in order to qualify for certain funding, tax credits, you need a Canadian national in the number 2 slot on your call sheet. So he would have fulfilled that requirement and would have been Seth Rogen, not maybe as big as he is now, but pretty big. So I think that really probably helped the film both qualify for the funding and financing it would have gotten through soft money in Canada, but also made it more financially viable around the world. So that's what I meant is I think he would have been a key piece in the movie getting made.
And Luke Kirby, hadn't reached any kind of, because he'd gotten a lot of exposure with, was it Mrs. Maisel, which would have been after. Okay, yeah. So Rogen would have been the pull. Okay.
I certainly had never heard of him. Looking at his credits, he was, working actor and had done some Canadian television and some episodic day player work, but it looked like this would have been a major step for him. And then, like you said, he was like Lenny Bruce and Miss Maisel, and that's when I saw him again. I like Seth Rogen a lot. Like, I think of him as, when we think of like Canadians successful in Hollywood, I know there's the James Camerons and other people, the Jim Carreys,
the Ryan Reynolds.
The Ryan Reynolds. I think Seth Rogen is actually the one I admire the most.
Really?
Because he produces a lot of films. He doesn't just act.
Oh.
He makes the films that he wants to see. He does seem to have a strong sense of the space he occupies on screen and like casts himself wisely that way. Mm-hmm. So like one of my favorite rom-coms of the last few years is Long Shot with him and Charlize Theron.
Haven't seen it.
Oh, I just adore the film.
Okay.
And it's using his persona really wisely opposite.
It didn't get a good review though, did it?
It didn't hit widely. It didn't hit well in theaters. The reviews were middling. It has now since found a huge following.
Oh, neat.
I love it. I think it's so enjoyable and works with ideas of shame and compromise. And I just think it's a perfect rom-com. But he also like produces like Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles and then like the series The Boys on Amazon Prime, which I really like. And he's a great producer. He's a great actor. He's a great director. I mean, famously, he co-directed the movie that almost brought down Sony Pictures, or the North Korea.
Oh,
yes. Forgetting its name.
Yes, with James. That's
Frank,
who I was picturing.
Yeah, James Franco's in it.
The Interview.
Yes. He has movies that he likes, the kinds of movies and comedies he likes, and he makes them. And I just admire.
That's very cool.
What he does.
He's got his hands in a lot of different pies.
Yeah. And I think he uses that to great effect in this film in the sense that he's not the guy you would typically cast in this role. And I think that's what creates a little bit of what feels like tension between the two of them. Like he doesn't quite. He's the gentle, loving husband, but it's Seth Rogen. And so it doesn't quite, you can understand Michelle Williams' point of view of like, it's not quite what I want or something. Yeah. I think he's employing his persona in an interesting way in this film.
I do think it's wonderful that you don't feel like you're watching quote unquote Seth Rogen. He's not very habited as a person or he's able to mute it and use it in service to the piece that he's in. He never sticks out that way in anything that I've seen him in. I think he delivers a really quiet, genuine performance. I really like him.
I think he's really great.
I like him as Lou.
Michelle Williams, what did you think of her here?
Well, she's always interesting for me because I can find her boring, but I just think she's such a diamond. Like she's such a gem. She always picks interesting projects. Yeah. I think the most popular thing I ever saw her in was Brokeback. She's
Were you a Dawson's Creek person? Like, do you know her from Dawson's Creek?
Oh, you're right. I'm forgetting about Dawson's Creek and where she really came from. Show. No, it was never a thing for me either. Okay, so I don't really know. Most of my viewing experience of her is in indie film.
Yeah, me too.
And I really like her in that space. And she reminds me of like Robin Wright Penn, where she can do the big stuff, but she is always going to be looking for the next cool, challenging piece, both for herself and in terms of what the message of the film conveys to engage in. And I really love like the artistes, the people who are really there for crafting. So I find her essence is so wonderful to be around. And I think it permeates all of her projects, whether it's the kind of peaches and cream coloring of her face or the way it's almost like what you get more about being around kids. There's something not necessarily childlike about her, but exposed in a way that you don't see a lot of adults exposed. For me, as a viewer.
Like a vulnerability?
A type of purity. I never don't believe her. Sometimes I'm a bit, because she's so in that ethos of like radical authenticity, I don't like, in terms of us talking about theater or film being heightened reality, not just reality. Sometimes she's really in that reality framework and it's a bit too much like I'm watching real life. But that's a pretty great problem to have. Like, what an actress. But I am charmed by her, and I'm a bit fascinated by her ability and trust her ability to access characters. I think she really knows what she's up to and she really understands characters deeply. And again, there's this quality of not being guarded, a naturalness in her performance. Yeah, I think she's great in this.
Yeah, as you say that, I'm thinking like the last film I saw her in was The Fabelmans, the Spielberg film, where she plays, because it's an autobiographical movie, and she plays Spielberg's mom effectively. And she's very exposed and raw and vulnerable.
Yeah, she can go there. She's just very real.
And a really beautiful performance. She popped for me. I saw her in Brokeback Mountain, and then this Kelly Reichardt movie called Wendy and Lucy, where almost nothing happens in the film. It's one of those very plot light movies, but I was utterly captivated by her and loved the movie, and largely because of her, the way that she just holds the screen. Let's jump into the film. We're entering spoiler territory. We'll just walk through it. It's not a plot heavy film, but we could walk through some of the main events and unpack them a little bit and talk about it. The opening shot is this sort of out of focus shot that comes into focus with her baking in the kitchen. And we follow her feet moving back and forth across. And then she finally lands sitting on the floor, leaning against the oven, looking inside it. She's been making muffins. She looks a little sad. And of course, we're going to come back to that because that's exactly what the final shots of the movie are as well.
And someone walks by her while she's looking and watching the muffins bake.
We can't tell who it is. Yeah. It's out of focus. But
again, there's so many beautiful close-up shots where they made it about the foreground and the background is kind of blurred. There's these close-ups, like you said, of the feet or her licking part of the batter off her hand, like just really beautiful.
The feet was interesting because she's going back and forth. They really highlight that. And there's a sense, I don't know, the sense the film is signaling that she's doing a bit of a dance. She's going back and forth between these 2 points in the kitchen. And like, because why else? Why are you shooting feet? Why like every shot when you're watching a movie is intentional. Yeah. There's a million ways to cover that scene. And Sarah Polley chooses to show the feet going back and forth. So I think there's something there. So the whole opening sequence or the opening series of scenes is she's in Nova Scotia. We learn later that she writes the pamphlets for Parks Canada.
Yes.
And she's at like a heritage park. And
I would love that job. If sexology doesn't work out for me, I'm going to do that.
So anyone at Parks Canada, if you're listening, Ashley's website is in the show notes. You can contact her.
That's right. I could be the ranger who also gave intimacy advice. It's perfect.
It's, I wouldn't have noticed this the first time I saw the movie, but there's actors doing a reenactment at this heritage site. And it's, I don't know, 1800s or something, maybe earlier. And there's someone being publicly punished for being an adulterer.
Yes. Public humiliation.
And I'll just say now that one of my arguments for this movie is that it's essentially a rom-com, but it's like a rom-com around fidelity, infidelity, monogamy, whatever. And this is the meet cute. So we haven't seen Seth Rogen's character up to this point.
We're not bonded to him and them yet.
Not at all. The first male lead we meet is Luke Kirby's character, Daniel. And the meet cute is watching this reenactment of a public shaming humiliation. And one of the actors going, you whip, putting the flogger in her hands and inviting her to whip the adulterer.
Her hand, yeah.
And then Daniel calls out, put your back into it because he's also there.
Yeah. Which she does not like.
Yeah, she's upset about that. I thought it was pretty funny. And then they head home and they meet on the plane. And it turns out they're sitting next to each other, which, every movie's allowed one coincidence, and that's your coincidence.
It was well used, yeah. Oh, actually, they have a couple, but anyway.
I suppose meeting at the park and then meeting on the plane.
Yeah.
And he notices that she took a wheelchair to the gate. and asks about it. And she's like, I've got a bad leg or whatever. And he calls her bullshit on that. And this is like, a lot of movies will kind of do a theme statement at the beginning of the movie. And this is the movie essentially going, here's the theme of the movie.
In case you were doubting this at all, this is what is going on. Yeah.
So she says, I'm afraid
Actually, I think this movie has two.
Okay.
But
We'll
anyway,
get to
this
that.
is their initial.
I'm afraid of connections, she says, running, rushing, and not knowing, trying to figure it out, wondering if I'm going to make it. I don't like being in between things, which of course we come back to.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful scene, right? Because she's feeling more internal. She's not as open to the connection. And he, again, when we look at romance, there's a lot of the early cues of having some kind of romantic purpose with someone. Like there's a type of way that he can see past what she's presenting. So he's challenging, he's provoking already. Yeah. And that the eroticism behind someone not buying the mask that you put on and actually seeing you is...
And still being attracted to you.
And still being attracted to you is huge, because I say often in my sessions, two masks can't ever be intimate. So there has to be some kind of risk and vulnerability. But of course, in our intimacies or in the world, we're doing the best we can, and we're presenting ourselves the way where we feel like we might be able to both cope and get our needs met and all these other kinds of things. So when someone doesn't need your agency in taking down that mask, but is actually able to access you in your essence without permission, but with complete love, we've got a little bit of romance already, whether she's awoke to it yet or not. It takes her a while to enjoy Luke Kirby's gentle questioning and statements and challenges and provocations. He's kind of like doing a bit of stick handling in the beginning, like a very sweet and gentle stick handling, but with that penetrative purpose of, I get you. I've already seen you. But she does answer his questions, as we can see. I mean, those are not small statements. I'm afraid of being afraid is another thing she happens to say.
So her point was that she just gets wheeled through the airport, so she doesn't have to have agency in making her own choices and finding her way to the right gate.
Yes.
So you just get someone to wheel her there. They share a taxi, and it turns out they're neighbors. You're right. There's actually more than there's a few coincidences in a row. They're at the park together. They're on the same plane ride, and then it turns out they're neighbors, essentially. He lives across the street. And when they finally get home, that's when she cops to it that she's married, which suggests she knew that this was flirtatious, that there was a connection there.
Absolutely, because you see her, it's really beautifully played, because you see Michelle Williams hesitate for a minute and then blurt it out, which becomes a theme in the movie, which is that she hesitates because she can feel her longing, but then there's a part of her that comes in that's full of love and wants to have integrity, and she just blurts it out. And his reply is, well, that's too bad.
That's too bad. Yeah. And it's interesting, the film fades out. It fades out, goes to black, fades back in, and it's a new morning with her back with her husband. And we're introduced to Seth Rogen, but it's the opening was the meet cute in its own.
It's a bubble, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bubble, and the whole color palette changes when they're in Toronto. As soon as they're in Toronto, you've got these popping primary colors and the leafy streets of Little Portugal, and the city is actually a character in the film, as we've seen in many films. Mm-hmm. But when I was watching interviews with Sarah Polley, she felt bad because some people had seen the film and moved to Toronto, not knowing that she had kind of taken and done a bit of magical realism.
Sure.
She boosted it a little bit, and they were only seeing this tiny, for instance, she cheated the waterfront. And I remember saying to Martin, I've been to Toronto. Don't you have to go to Toronto Island to get but Sarah Polley's like, oh, this is such an amazing city. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had beach access as well? And so she felt bad. That some people had shifted their life for that.
That's so interesting that you say that. So I have a good friend who lives in that neighborhood. And so anytime I've gone to go to TIFF, to the Toronto Film Festival over the years, especially when I was directing, I would stay at him and his partner's place, just a few blocks from where that is being shot. So I have a lot of warm feelings about that neighborhood and that area. I would walk through it. And then I'm like, I didn't know the beach was that close.
The same thought, yeah.
Is that he just jogs there? So that's helpful, because that didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
But it is a really lovely neighborhood.
Oh, you know what? I want to go back, actually, because we missed this juicy little piece of them coming out the airplane together, Luke Kirby and Michelle. and they're completely still and quiet,
Yeah.
and they're walking side by side, but there's this incredible connection between the two of them where you can really feel, I don't know if anyone listening has ever had that feeling before, when you might be with a stranger and there's just a silent conversation or an ease. It can be different with different people, but like there's some sort of lock and key energetically that just settles the system, and it's like a form of discourse, and that's what you feel. And she's also in transit. She's leaving from the plane to go back home, and he's with her. So she doesn't have her wheelchair and she's not between gates, but she's arriving and she now has a accompaniment, and it's a powerful shot, I think.
It's interesting. So we wake up what's seemingly the next day, and we discover that her and Lou, Seth Rogen, have this way of talking about their love for each other that involves extreme violence.
Yes.
I love you so much, I want to put you in a meat grinder and whatever, which comes back. What was your interpretation of what was going on there?
I think it's brilliant. Do you know Judd Apatow's wife's name?
I know
She's
who
an
she
actress.
is. Yeah, I know she is, but I'm forgetting.
Okay. My interpretation, I think it's just brilliant. I think in marriage, we're fully in love, and that's also the person that we want to throttle. And the love-hate-ness of being pair bonded over time is kind of brilliant.
Leslie Mann.
What's that?
Leslie Mann.
Leslie Mann. Okay, so I was thinking about this moment it was in a Judd Apatow film, and Paul Rudd and her are just looking at each other, and there's this long monologue about how they would kill each other finally. And he goes, oh, I would throw you in a wood chipper. She said, wood chipper? Oh, that's all very sudden. And she would choose poison and slowly do it over time so he wouldn't notice. And they're just eye gazing and like saying how much they love each other. I went to my sister's and brother-in-law's place and I said, this reminded me of you guys. I sent them in. They're like, oh yeah, we know that. We talk about that. That's like totally us. And so there is a healthy hate in marriages. I think that's part of the passion of a marriage. And I don't know if that's where they have lots of goofy games, but this violent one, I think, is a way for them to chuckle at part of that and one-up each other.
Yeah, so early in the film, we get a sense of like Seth Rogen, Lou's family's extended family, which includes Sarah Silverman as his sister. Michelle Williams' character is Margot. We get introduced to, so Sarah Silverman plays Geraldine. She's been sober for 10 months. We see kind of like the loud family that Lou comes from. And when everyone leaves their house after this party, we do get a sense that Lou and Margot, so Michelle Williams and Seth Rogen, they're on the same team.
Yeah.
They're working together. But then Daniel's character is reintroduced. We see that he has a rickshaw across the street.
Driver.
He goes down to the beach, however that's
responsible for transporting people.
Right. Right. Wheelchair. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
This was a moment where I thought things started to go sideways for Margot's character. I wish they had a relationship where she could have shared about Daniel with Lou.
I was going to ask you to go back to how you would coach people, because you also have this great quiz that you and your partner have put together that's specifically about communication.
ResponsibleRelating.com. Go there right now. Hey folks, just chiming in to say the website for this quiz that Ashley referenced has actually changed from when we first recorded the podcast. So if you're interested in taking the Hidden Patterns Relationship Quiz, and I recommend that you do so, you can find it at somarelating.ca. The link will also be in the show notes. All right, back to the podcast.
How would you enter such a conversation? But you would say it needs to be talked about, and immediately?
Well, I mean, soon afterwards. I think withholds can be really damaging. And when we work with people to help them co-create agreements, one of the areas once it feels safe and everyone's comfortable, to have some agreements about sharing about desires. And maybe
have it as a general conversation first,
yeah.
Then you can, there's a nice foundation for referring, kind of?
Yeah, I genuinely encourage people to move towards an understanding that each of you are going to find you're going to be attracted to different people at different times, and that is normal. That's not a threat to the relationship. In fact, it's an opportunity to reinforce your relationship and to just acknowledge that, yeah, I found this person really attractive and magnetic, and I still choose you, And the more we can just communicate like, oh, I met this really hot guy on the airplane. He was totally flirting with me. I kind of got turned on about it. Just to be like open and to know that that's not a threat. And even to use that energy into your own relationship and make love with your partner using that energy, right?
Yeah. Or if it is a threat, unpacking what's the hidden nutrient that could be integrated into your relationship. Now, not every relationship has the setup the characteristics to be able to fulfill every nutrient. That's not practical, but there might be like, it might be completely possible, or it might be possible to do 5%, or it might be possible to just support your partner to have elements like that, whether it's you open for certain things or whether you find non-erotic ways to have the same reaction. Like, for instance, if he was really exciting for her, what could she do that's more stimulating for her in life? You know, like parallels like that. So there could be like coaching like that. But I'm willing to bet her feeling of malaise preceded her trip, right? And so sometimes life brings us ambassadors for our state, like how we're actually experiencing life and what isn't working for us. And so, you know, in comes Daniel, the chariot puller. When you're looking for understanding, you know, it's almost like the boatman on the river Styx. Like there's a rites of passage element to the work that they've given him for the character intentionally. But I love what you said about making sure that the communication happens pretty soon. And it's different with proximity, right? This person's across the road.
Yeah.
So
which is even more reason to
Vegas actors.
Yeah, there's like what you're saying, there's an opportunity there of like, what was he doing that turned you on? What was he doing that maybe we're not doing? Like, I felt seen. I felt he called me on my bullshit. I would like it if you sometimes did that. Or if you, sometimes I'm putting on a mask, I want to give you permission just to pull that mask away and just to see me, or whatever it might be.
Well, one of the things that we see in the film that is the distinction between those two connections is that we see Seth Rogen's character, Lou, not always be present with her. And when he is present, it's in a childish way. And so there's a difference between being with a man, and I'm not saying men can't be playful and sweet and like nothing like that, but there's a difference between being with a man who's full of presence that can engage you in all the different colors and textures of what you're offering, like in your energy or what you're saying, and someone who's in their own bubble, just being like, this is the cutesy thing we do. And when you ask an important question, I dismiss or brush you off. And so we see over the course of the film, how many opportunities she gave him to actually, Lou, to engage with her in a deep way. And so what Daniel did right from the onset is engage with her in a deep way.
Okay, let me push back.
Ooh, okay.
I think what's interesting about like any movie like this, we're seeing the movie through her eyes. So she's in every scene, actually. It's entirely her perspective. We don't get scenes that don't involve her. And so part of that is like her interpretation of what's happening between her and Lou. And every time that she tried to engage Lou, it was when he was doing his work. So we discover later, because we think he's just cooking and she's just, you know, interrupting him as he cooks and she wants to connect with him, but that's his job.
Yeah, that's a late reveal.
But that's a late reveal. So at the beginning you think, gosh, this guy's a bit of a dick. Like she's making these bids for connection. He keeps turning her down, but the movie only shows her doing it when he's cooking.
I mostly agree with you, except you can tell that part of it's on his side in terms of, we call it transmission reception work, right? Like, where's the gap in the bid for connection? Could it have been clearer on her end? And then in terms of how he's receiving it, is their anniversary. He's not at work and she's saying, let's get to know each other. Let's have fun. Recently, my partner and I have been doing movie dates, and we have a cinema by our place that serves wine. And I have this habit of being like, I want to get there an hour earlier to have a glass of wine with you so we can get to know each other. And it makes him laugh because he's like, what are you talking about? It's like, and this is someone who's like really, really like voraciously, like has a huge relational veracity, but he doesn't relate to it like that at all. And I don't need cheesy questions or anything, but I do want to have that face-to-face, fresh way of being like, we both have wine. He barely wants wine or beer either. But for me, that's a prop for some reason that makes it ceremonial. And I think it is important to reperceive our partners. And I think sometimes we make these stalemates in personal relationships too much about the relationship, and we don't know how to freshen our own self up. We don't know how to stay contemporary with how we're feeling. We choose things that make us feel safe. We're not always living alive in our moments either. And so we don't give our partner an opportunity to reperceive us, and we get a bit lazy or scared, or like once we have a certain routine, we can become deaf to ourselves. And I think it's one of those classic things in life where because we're dealing with someone else, we can be aggressive or think they're boring but we have all those feelings about ourselves. You can't outrun your own asshole, right? It's always following you. Mm-hmm. So I do think there's like a lot of building blocks in this for both of them. And I like what you said about communication. I think it's number one.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. Those bids for connection that she's making, he can just be like, hey, honey, I'm working right now. I see that you're reaching out to me. Just let me finish what I'm doing and then we'll connect. You're right, like the anniversary dinner. She says, why don't you ask me how I'm doing? He's like, I know how you're doing, don't I? Like, he goes, dinners aren't to catch up, but maybe they are because we're changing all the time. We're evolving as people in every moment. And as partners, it's the chance to, like you said, re-perceive them.
Yeah. And I think those things need to be ritualized when we're in a mundane situation with someone. The ritual helps, But in favor of Lou, I think there's a beautiful manhood in being reliable, focused, sweet, completely loving. And he didn't lack imagination it seems like he's lacking imagination in the marriage, but we learn from the long joke that he tells at the end, which we'll talk about, that he does think of little things to do for her and their life together. Yeah.
And again, the film is just from her point of view. If we were making Lou's movie, we might see other parts that she's missing, that his bids for connection, that she's going, well, I'm obviously working here, like, go away. I wanted to point out, like in one of these first scenes where there's some bids for connection, there's a little bit of struggle. They also introduce this like baby talk. So there's the violent, loving, murderous talk. And then there's also this other way that they communicate, which is in this baby talk. And there's a time, so they're doing the baby talk and then they start to get intimate. And Rogen's character, Lou, does the baby talk as they're getting it on. And no, it was the other way. I'm trying to remember. One of them basically goes, no, that we can't combine the two.
She does. They were actually being super flirtatious and a bit sexual, but it hadn't gone to like kissing or anything. And then as soon as he tries to kiss her, she's the one who does the
She's the one who does it.
And then he says, great, he gets really hurt.
Right. Yeah. Because that was his bid for connection as well.
Yeah.
And it gets rejected. I want to point out, watching it with subtitles, there's nothing that's unintentional in a film most of the time. So during that scene, there's a Feist song in the background called Secret Heart. So as you're watching the scene and the subtitles are coming up, it says, Secret Heart, why so mysterious? Why so sacred? Why so serious? Maybe you're just acting tough. Maybe you're just not man enough. What's wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Those are the lines to the
nice.
song.
Yeah, I like the Feist throughout the movie. Right.
So the film then is through this next section, is a kind of will she, won't she? We're both understanding the kind of like ordinary life that her and Lou live, watching CBC News at night.
But it's not so dreary either. Like, the house is gorgeous. Yeah. It's a character home. You've got, again, the primary colors I was so romanced by. I was just like, ooh, all the greens and the reds. And they did a beautiful job lighting everything. But yeah, you can feel that they are safe, sweet, and you can feel her boredom. It's hard to perceive whether anything's wrong for Lou.
Yeah, it seems like he's like, everything's fine. Yeah. Even it's interesting, they're watching the news. There's been an earthquake.
And they're having their TV dinner.
And they're just sitting there quietly and it's talking about an earthquake that hit Toronto or somewhere in Canada. Again, like things are happening below the surface and they're
not reacting, right?
They're not reacting.
Back to this, how important it is for us to be responsive to our partners, even when we feel deadened to them. And it could also be a nice nod to like, there's an earthquake coming.
Exactly. Yeah. She keeps getting up early, hoping to get Daniel's.
And going for a walk because he can see her because they're right in that across the street.
Yeah. But it's again, this will she, won't she? And this time she starts walking knowing this is the direction he's going to go. She's not owning her desire at this point. It's a kind of a covert desire that she wants other people to pick up and do something with, which is really honestly something that comes up a lot with people. Like, instead of going, I have this desire, what do I do with it? Tell my partner, work it out in other ways, or just own it.
They try to angle it or
she's kind of desire smuggling as that quiz.
Desire smuggling, yes.
Not our term. Someone else came up with that, but that's in that quiz. But it's just like hoping that Daniel will do something about it, because she's too scared to do it. There's a great scene that I found really impactful where, I suppose it's a little on the nose, but she goes to Aquasize.
Yes.
with Geraldine, with Sarah Silverman's character, and they're in the change room afterwards, and just everybody's just naked.
Yeah,
and they're
so nice.
They're just talking about marriage
women of all ages
and what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
scrubbing their pits and their
And they're talking about whether or not
Jealous.
they should bother shaving their legs. Will their husbands even care? Like, what does it matter anymore? And there's this desire for newness and freshness. And then on the other side of the change room, there's these elderly women who are mostly overweight. And one of them said, because one of the characters talking with Margot says, sometimes I just want something new. And then one of the older ladies says, new things get old, just like the old things did. And then they just witness these older women whose bodies are different now.
Which changes my mind. Now there's three main quotes that to me that house the movie.
But it turns out that Daniel was watching. And so
At the pool.
At the pool. Yeah, not in the change room. That would have been inappropriate. And they walk and go for a drink. And that's where she sort of crosses another line where she says, I want to know what you would do to me. And because they've been flirting with this. And
again, brilliant acting from Michelle Williams. It's just like, you don't feel like she's going to say anything remotely like that.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. And he slowly ravishes her with his words.
This is actually sidebar. This is sometimes homework I give couples because, some couples like to access some eroticism by watching porn or reading porn, but writing your own and letting one of the lead characters be your partner really allows them to see themselves as part of your fantasy and know how you would want to make love to them. It's almost like what you were talking about, owning your desires. They might not be the same with every single person, but it's a beautiful exercise.
Yeah, there's an element where he's fully owning his desires. She's just playing around the edges and
That's their dance, the whole film, mostly. Yeah.
Instead of saying what she wants, she sort of says, what do you want to do to me? Here was something that came up for me, which was, so he's playing a 29-year-old in the movie. She's playing a 28-year-old. He feels like a manic pixie dream guy. Sort of. He's the artist who's just too humble to put his work out into the world. He lives in a studio, an apartment. He paints for her. He's like, he drives a rickshaw to earn money and he goes to the beach every morning just to start his day. And then when she asks, he can tell her exactly what he would do to her. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
Right.
This guy actually doesn't exist.
Well, he might at this phase.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's a version of that. There's some men like that get there when they're older. But I know that it's her from her point of view and he's a fantasy, but he's quite a fantasy in this movie. Like the guy who lives that kind of solitary, scared to put his art out, doesn't have a real job at that.
But in a romanticized version, because he doesn't feel like a deadbeat. He
That's
feels
right.
like he's chosen most of it. And
Yeah. I questioned the reality. It felt like the manic pixie dream girl version that guys have, where it's this woman who is quirky and weird and just focus on making the man the best version of him he can be. And in this case, he's like the quirky artist who can see right through her and seduce her exactly the way she wants to be seduced.
Yeah, it does seem like there's for all genders and seems to be this aspect of romanticizing a person that takes away all our effort, like and our confusion. So I feel you on what that means. And also, I think it takes the film time to reveal Daniel's holes.
Yeah, I do think the film ultimately critiques the fantasy. Yeah. So I think it is honest. I just wanted to note that.
It's a good point, yeah.
Yeah. So again, the halfway point of the film is an almost consummation where she goes out at night and they kind of have this dance in the pool. No pool that I know is ever lit that way and is empty.
They have really good pools in Toronto by the lake.
If you recall from our Bliss episode, there's a similar kind of like empty pool late at night for the purposes of our main character.
Oh, yeah.
But they do this dance and then he touches her.
Right.
And that sort of pulls her out of the
Bursts
dreamlike
the
state. Yeah, burst the bubble. And again, it's this will she, won't she? Will they get together, won't they? They have these moments of connection, disconnection, and this one ends in disconnection.
So he's always orbiting around her and seeing which way she's going to choose. And she keeps being too shy to pull the trigger in any one way. So she keeps herself in transit, even though she hates it.
The other thing I wanted to point out, another scene that happens soon after this is Seth Rogen's character is again on the phone with what seems like the publisher.
Yeah.
And again, she's making bids for connection in the middle of his work. And he's trying his best. But it's actually sounds like an intense conversation. And she's trying to be playful with him and he's trying to respond.
Yeah. She comes in walking bored and looking bored. And then it reminded me of like what a 7-year-old would do to get attention from her father if he was distracted with work. Because it's super, she puts his fingers in her mouth, her fingers in his mouth. And really, it's one of those things where you try to make your partner laugh during a phone call, or you do something sexual to them and hope that the heavy breathing doesn't embarrass them on the other end of the line.
So then the next scene is it's their anniversary, as we've already alluded to, and Daniel offers to drive them in his rickshaw, and which is
it's the first time Lou and Daniel even meet.
That's right.
And are aware of each other. And for me, it was a sickening moment because you see that she doesn't want, first of all, for Daniel to have to labor by carrying the weight of her and her husband.
Yep.
And she doesn't want to set Lou up for that type of humiliation because she knows that he doesn't know about their romance. So again, she's stuck between two places. But Lou kind of thinks she's weird for not wanting to try because she's such a playful, excited person, and they jump in.
Yeah, but it did feel like a boundary line was crossed there, like by making that offer and putting her in that position. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he's provoking her the whole time, but the provocations are getting bigger and bigger.
And they go to their anniversaries, always go to a movie and a dinner. And I just wanted to note they go to the Royal Theatre and see Mon Uncle Antoine, which is a classic Canadian film. I just wanted to plug there.
Totally.
The next day, her and Daniel spend the day together. And there's a bunch of interesting things that happen through that day, but the sort of the main visual one that comes back is they decide to go and ride the Scrambler ride at an amusement park.
What a great scene.
Yeah, so they're
magic.
Yeah, they're in this Scrambler. It's Video Killed the Radio Stars, the song playing.
Like, could there be a better? Like, she nailed it.
Tell me why.
Because it's the replacing of something old with something new. Because of the energy of the song in association with the Scrambler and how it's filmed. You?
Yeah, there's a line in it. We can't rewind. We've gone too far. Like, yeah, the new killing the old. But again, they get at one point in the Scrambler, they start to like lean into each other, and then the ride just comes to an abrupt halt, and nothing happens there. But well,
you expect them to kiss. I mean, they're playing with the tension. Like they each slide into each other. They each look at each other at different moments. It's a beautiful shot.
So she's playing with her desires. She can't fully own them. Daniel keeps essentially asking her to move towards him, and she does, but then she can't fully, and ultimately she doesn't want to hurt Lou, So she makes a decision there. Yeah.
But it's a decision that has sacrifice in it for her in terms of the things that she doesn't feel alive or happy with in life. So what I loved, and that is so rare in human relationships, is that he wants her to make the decision in respect of her partnership. He's still there. Yeah. He's still waiting at the gate, but how do you know from the outside of a relationship whether two people are fulfilled and they don't, what the quality of the relationship is and everything. But he says, it's your choice to make. He makes it really clear to her. I'm not going to because she wants again him to make the decision for her.
You're right.
And he hands it back to her.
At the end of the day, she decides to go into his apartment with him, even though he didn't actually invite her, as far as I can remember. And then impulse. She sits on the bed and sort of looks at him.
But she looks like forlorn and sad and confused.
And is hoping that Daniel's going to kind of make the decision for them and they can
rip off the Band-Aid kind of.
That's right. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, exactly. Like, this is your choice. He gives agency back to her.
And that's part of why she leaves. If it had happened, they would have gone into a whole other movie.
So I'll jump ahead a little bit, and ultimately Daniel moves away, leaves a postcard, looks like all his things are being packed up, and is leaving somewhere. And Lou has suspected something's going on, but he sees her reaction to that. And she even tells him, because in a scene where he verbally made love to her, they talked about, she said, let's meet in 30 years in Cape Breton and we'll finally kiss. I feel like I've earned that if I've been together with my partner for 35 years. At that point, I should be allowed to kiss someone else, which is interesting around agreements and things like that. So she tells that story to Lou, who's absolutely distraught and crushed by it. But here's a question I had for you. I wondered, have you ever had someone who you thought early on was a soulmate and then met them years later?
And seen the truth?
Yeah, and seen what they were like?
Something like that, but I wouldn't say soulmate.
Yeah.
Do you have a story?
A little, slightly, but there's just that fantasy of like, this is the perfect person for me. They're going to fulfill all my dreams, and this sort of romantic idea that I'll meet you again in the future and be able to fulfill them.
I've definitely had people over time that I haven't been able to let go of thinking about that are curiosities, and they're pregnant in a way. Like if I broke up with my partner, and I ran into one of them, I would make a conclusion.
I certainly, someone like maybe my first kind of like true love crush when I was a teenager, I got to meet them 30 years later, and they're just they're just a person. Yeah. Like they're just like this middle-aged person just like me with all the same hang-ups, or their own hang-ups, I should say. And it was a helpful exercise for me just to like remember that so much of the fantasy is just a fantasy. So she tells Lou, and we see Lou go through all the stages of grief
That is one of my favorite parts of the movie, is just seeing Seth Rogen come in and out of all of the different, it's like a fast track of the stages of grief, just like the anger, the regret, the doubt, Yeah,
exactly. But it's interesting. There's 25 minutes left in the movie. Like most of the movie has been not them together in any way, or this relationship not being consummated. It's just, for me, interesting. In a romantic comedy, usually there's a true connection at the beginning of some kind. Then,
it gets challenged.
Then it gets challenged, and they separate and they come back together. So she tells Lou everything and says essentially she's leaving. It's all off screen because we already know.
Which is nice.
Yeah, we already know. You don't need to tell us again. And then she runs to the beach. Again, the beach is just right there. Apparently. For me, that was interesting because a romantic comedy, one of the tropes is the run at the end of the movie.
Yes.
There's always a run. And so there's literally a run at the end of this movie where she runs to the person she's going to finally bond to. But this is obviously a different kind of romantic comedy. But then that leaves us, there's essentially 20 minutes left. It's like,
where's this going to go?
Now what?
Yeah.
Now what?
It's so brilliant. Yeah.
Because in a lot of movies, this all would have happened in the first act. Maybe and then we would see, what does this relationship turn into?
Right.
This is all going to be in 20 minutes. And in fact, it's even less than that. So with 20 minutes or so left, now we get the Leonard Cohen song. We get a sense of like the dance between them is going to be consummated. We have this one shot, this rotating shot of a studio.
Heaven.
It's actually a studio. It's not a studio apartment. It's like a studio.
I know, my Vancouver little brain was like, pshaw, like who's renting that if you
on a rickshaw
in a
Parks,
park
Canada.
Like, this is fate, Toronto.
So the shot just like rotates around this set in the middle of the studio, which is the bed, and it's this long circling time lapse shot where it's all kinds of sex. Is the main thing that's happening there.
And then setting up their house.
Different pieces of the house show up. How did you interpret what was going on there? There's like amazing sex with the two of them. Then there's different versions of threesomes. And
first of all, I think it's kind of unforgettable. I think it's a beautiful shot, and you feel like you're waltzing, like you feel like you're turning around the room. And also some of the things that are happening in the apartment are part of what she was missing in her life with Lou. It's not all chicken stews, which is this movie puts metaphors in plain view. Yeah. It does not. It doesn't beat around the bush.
He writes cookbooks for cooking chicken.
Yes, one thing.
Which is the blandest of meats.
The blandest of meats, yeah.
And the cookbook turns out to be called "It Tastes Like Chicken."
Right.
Yeah.
It's reliable. It's steady. It's nourishing. Those are the properties, right? And with Daniel, you see that there's all this. It's kind of shocking. You see them make love in a much different way than you see Lou and her at least start. We don't ever see Lou and her really make love. But
at the beginning of the movie, we see one where they just like pull their pants down and they're going to have sex now. And we cut away with Lou and Margot.
Yeah.
It's very almost clinical.
Yeah. It's like, okay, here we are. We're so familiar with each other. And with these guys, there's like this polarity, this dynamic quality. They're using different positions. They're not wearing their pajamas. They're in the middle of a bed without a frame. So they're in the middle of everything. They're not under the covers in their home. So there's something exposed. And then during one rotation, you see that they've brought in a third person. Yeah. And so for me, it gives a sense of passage of time, of course, the sense of the waltz and the sense of growth, like inner growth and experimentation and her world opening, their worlds opening.
This incredible shot, though, lasts around 2 minutes. And then they're back just watching TV.
Yeah.
Like Lou and Margot did before.
Yeah.
She starts to use baby language like they used before.
Like her and Lou did. Yeah.
Like her and Lou did. And there's even a scene in the bathroom that mirrors when she was making this incredible connection with Daniel. She would return home with Lou. She'd be peeing on the toilet and he's brushing his teeth. Like,
yeah.
and then that happens now with Daniel.
Yeah.
And there's this feeling of like the new has become old.
The old, as the naked lady proclaimed. And the way Daniel responds to her baby talk is with man energy, going back to the different energies that people can hold so she's trying to be playful. He doesn't join her in play. He looks her deeply in the eyes and says, I love you very much. And so you would think earlier that would have been the first thing that she would have needed. And then you see her get disappointed and her shoulders slump a little bit because she doesn't get to do the I we love you. So
yeah. So the last main scene of the film is that she gets called back to Lou's house. Something has happened with Geraldine. She's fallen off the wagon, and Lou's niece is asking in the sort of the crisis of where's Geraldine? She's drunk. She's gone. She left her daughter alone.
She's relapsed, yeah.
This little girl has asked to see Margot. And so, yes, I think the scene is contrived. I love this movie. And when you think too hard about it, the scene's a little contrived.
Well, that's what I mean about coincidences.
Yeah.
You're back.
So she comes back, and so she's seeing Lou and the family for the first time. And then Geraldine drives her car drunkenly into the neighbor's garbage can and stumbles out and then kind of delivers the moral message to our protagonist. Because
she sees Margot, she takes her aside. She's like, you. And you can see how hurt that she is, that I guess we then learn that Margot hasn't reached out to any of the people that she's known as family for the past 5+ years since the breakup with Lou. And so she's really hurt. And at one point, Michelle Williams looks around because she doesn't know what Sarah Silverman's character is going to say to her. And she looks embarrassed. And she said, don't you be embarrassed about me. You should be embarrassed. And that's what leads to the moment of truth.
So here's the line from Sarah Silverman's character, Geraldine. You think everything can work out if you just make the right move. That must be thrilling. I think you really fucked up, Margot. In the big picture, life has a gap in it. It just does. You don't go crazy to fill it like some lunatic.
Brilliant. That is the quote. So 3 quotes in the movie, right? Like
the change room.
The transit.
The connections
transit,
one. Yeah.
And then this one.
And then she gets taken away with the police. There's a scene then there's a final moment with Lou. And it seemed to me she was asking Lou if Lou would take her back. Did you interpret it that way? She said, do you ever think...
No, I didn't. What I thought she was doing is her typical Margot move, pacing another reality because she wasn't happy with her own. So not necessarily that she met, but like testing the waters, not necessarily to get back, but not stand fully in her decision and know that she's cut something off for the rest, like irrevocably. And he doesn't want to play with her that way. And neither did he's more like Daniel in the beginning, where he says, I've got boundaries. Yeah. I know how to call you out, and you made your choice. And I was gracious within that choice. Because there's a bit of a callback to his initial reaction, because after he expresses his grief, he encourages her, and he's very gracious. It's one of my favorite moments in the film is when they're both sitting on either side of this window, another metaphor that's in plain view. And he says, go. He encourages her. If this is where your happiness and your best life is, then go. But I think it's that self-same thing, given the character that he is, that makes him go, I'm sorry, I gave you a clean break. You're not going to drag me into the gray. You give me that clean break.
Yeah, she's still sitting in that in-between, and he's, like you said in that scene, he's like, I don't want to sit in this. Like, if you're going to go to him. Don't make me sit here in the middle. And then you're right. He came across as like a much stronger character in that scene. It's like he has gone on his own journey.
He's gone through his fire, yeah.
And he's now holding strong in his own power. And then he does send her off in a gracious way by calling back the violent love gag. I don't know what to describe it.
It's a good term. She looks hurt and she takes his boundary and she's respectful. And so they say goodbye and she walks away. But then he goes, hey, Margot, before you go, and says a violent love thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So then the film ends with 2 different sequences. We go back to the opening shot where she's making muffins. She looks a little sad and tired. She leans against the oven and just watches her muffins bake. and the person who was out of focus comes into focus, and it's Daniel. And when you go back and look at that opening shot, it's Daniel. It's not Seth Rogen. She's just right back into what I would call like the ordinary life.
And there is a scene right before that, isn't it? When does the scrambler happen?
Yeah, so the scrambler is the last shot of the movie where she's on her own. It's the same song, Video Killed the Radio Star. And how did you interpret what was going on with her in that shot?
Well, the rotation of the scrambler, I think it's kind of stacked about like how life goes on, spins you around, can be confusing, but is ever rotating. But I interpreted it as the only, like one of the only hopes that the piece gives for her character. It gives a lot of love and light through the whole film, ultimately, like how much love she was able to explore and have in her life. But it's very encouraging to see her by herself and have a little smile at the end, because it seems like she might be able to, with the wake-up call that her sister-in-law gave her, might have a shot at addressing the fact that she might be okay in transit or with the gap. Or yeah. How did it affect you?
Yeah, I found it quite moving. I think it is connected to the kind of theme statement around connections, because when you're in the in-between, that's when you have to reckon with yourself. And if you just, as Geraldine said, like the gap, the reckoning with yourself, the sadness that we all experience, if you're just jumping from connection to connection, or new relationship, or exciting experience, whatever it is, to just try to fill that and avoid it, you're chasing wind. Like you're never going to quite get there.
You know how part of what I just heard you say is like when you break down the word avoid, it's avoid.
Avoid, yeah. Yeah.
That's really
Singular
interesting.
Void, yeah.
Anyway.
So I find, so in that moment where she's just on the scrambler by herself, because I think this is speaking some truth about the journey to just be in the stillness, be in the in-between, be with yourself and be okay. I think that's a journey that's a lot of us need to take and is worth taking and is ongoing. So I always find it beautiful and moving to see her enjoy being on her own and embrace the scramble and the movement and the
orientation, right?
The spinning,
disorienting, and she loves it too.
And to just be like, in this place of happiness, or I'm not sure, peace or joy. Yeah, I thought that was a really powerful ending. Loved that.
It's a gem of a movie. I really loved the whole setup of it.
Anything else? Final thoughts or things you would, if you were working with a couple like this, things you might bring to the surface?
We talked about that a little bit, but I do think this is a film about emotional maturity and relationship. I do think we get bored. I do think we get disgusted. I do think we get upset. I think there's two concentric circles that have relationship to each other. So there's two scramblers. There's the mega scrambler and the mini scrambler. And what I mean by that is like, our relationships have their own rotation, and then it's life outside of us, the things that we are not choosing, the life events, the world events, the contexts that we land ourselves, whether we lose a job, whether we lose an important figure in our life, whether we got to attain our dreams or not. And I think those two rotations really influence each other and change our needs base. At one point, Lou would have been the ideal, like the husband she could have never dreamt that she'd have, potentially. And so how do you continue to help each other in a relationship? Now we're assuming monogamy here in some ways, which is one of the implicit conflicts of the film, which may or may not need to be there. It seems like her and Daniel chose to kind of like outsource some other things that they wanted to experience. But let's say that that's the framework. How do you support each other to navigate how the relationship needs to change within that larger rotation? For instance, I do think it's wise to kind of know in the partnership, is there one person who needs more stability and one person more novelty overall? But then say the person who needs more novelty experiences something that takes them down a notch and is really painful. And the other person who requires stability is going through a really empowering season in their life. That might shift and scare that couple, and they might need to be more sensitive to how to nurture the other need in the other person because the presentation changed in their relationship, or just because things are going well for one and not the other. That's really a classic thing that happens in relationships, is like, something's going well for you. I want to be happy for you. We're talking some healthier relationships, but I want to be happy for you. But it's also a bit intimidating because when we sniff the winds of change, we know that, as much as abundance might be on the horizon, also loss could be. We don't know in what direction those things will flow. So we talked about communication, but I also think it's about awareness of self and using tools to know your sexuality. So key tools to understand what generates interest for you, arousal for you. Because if they're different than you and your partners, because you and I would do a lot of like couples coaching where we would help people understand how to, especially if there's a gap, how to have a satisfying sex life. If they have really different needs, like if someone's super kinky and someone's super vanilla and they just love each other and want to have kids and all the rest of it, how do you support them? So the foundation of that is knowing who you are as an erotic person and some of the structure of those needs, which isn't always easy. That's why we're out there for support. But there's a lot of like beautiful personal growth books and everything too that can help people. And you can do a DIY personal investigation. But I think it is scary there's reasons why we hold secrets from from our partner while we're growing. It's no surprise to me in the film that she met Daniel while she was away, for instance, when we can be our full self and not feel like we're threatening anyone by the shifting of our identity. What would be some of your answers to that question? And I have another question for you overall.
Yeah, I've shared some of them. I agree wholeheartedly with everything you're saying. I think just having conversations around agreements, understanding yourself, understanding that that's going to evolve, and being able to have open communication about what's going on with you and making intentional agreements, like especially in this case, as you pointed out, when Margot goes with Daniel, there is some kind of openness to their relationship and bringing other people in for sexual experiences. Mm-hmm. And so many people have unspoken agreements that they've inherited, that's tradition that they don't talk about, including monogamy. So actually, I think we need to have agency and make those intentional choices and be able to have conversations about those so that it's not just, there's no other choice. We can't even talk about it. So opening up dialogue to talk through what the relationship actually is, what the agreements are, what our needs are, and then to create space to be able to talk about whatever comes up and not be threatened by that. So I said it before, I would say it again. The space to share your desires, I think, is really important. And that can often be everything that you needed to do, like to just share them and for them to be received by your partner will for sure often takes the shame away, but can also take some of the energy that's like creating tension within your body, because it's not just the desire itself, it's the fact you feel like you have to keep it secret.
Yes, and it's often that compartmentalization of ourselves that leads to that, like,
which Daniel calls out, because his first painting of her shows this kind of
she hates it
bifurcated version where there's two versions of her, what she's presenting and what's actually going on underneath.
Right.
And as much as we can bring all the parts of ourselves to our partner, I think that helps a lot. And I wanted I understand that like other people who work in this field, this will feel obvious to them if they're listening, but I wanted just to speak to just the average listener who's maybe not a somatic sex educator. There's often a lot of tension in relationships around, hetero relationships around friendships with people of the opposite sex. I can't speak to how women talk or think about this, but men get really intimidated by that if their partner has other male friends. And there might have been an opportunity to express desires and share what she's feeling, and maybe or maybe not, but just have a friendship with Daniel and understand that there's some certain desires and energies, but they're not going to act on them. Or maybe there's some agreements where they will, I'm not sure, but that can also heighten all these feelings if there aren't some conversations or agreements in place where, hey, it's okay for you to have friendships with people of the opposite sex. I'm not threatened by that. I know that a lot of men are. And that it's even just scary to bring up that conversation.
Right. And how do you get under the beliefs and the behaviors of both people and see what they're up to and also what those things are provoking in them? One of the questions I'm left with for you is, do you think familiarity leads to erotic burnout? Seeing your partner on the toilet while they brush your teeth, waking up together every morning. One of the things I loved in the film was the presence of the fan, just going, again, it's like not the scrambler, like the rotation of life that's completely boring. And I
think it's true that NRE, like new relationship energy, will wear off and it will shift into something else. I do believe with some intentionality in communication and in the relationship that you can continue to evolve and inject energy into your erotic relationship with your partner. So I'd like to think it's possible to keep that energy. But I think part of it is just, again, allowing your desires to come to the surface, to communicate those desires, and even to work as a couple to explore those and see what's available. What about you?
I agree with you. And I also think it kind of depends on the setup of your sexuality, whether you're more towards, I think there's certain people's sexuality that are more inclined to mystery and intrigue. And there's certain people who don't feel more naturally muted by the mundane. I think there is a chemistry there that's individual. And I don't think most people will have the tools, time, or interest to go under and either change that, examine it, or enjoy it. Like the sex nerds out there will. Like the seekers, the sex nerds. When I coach people in my practice, I'm already aware that not everyone wants to go to the same depth with their inner knowledge and their experimentation with sex. Mm-hmm. So I give homework accordingly. I speak to them accordingly. But I do think there's a chemistry there. And I also think that we don't always recognize how much effort and fantasy that we gave to our energy, fantasy, preparation, good behavior to our dating life that we don't know how to apply because we can't do it all the time, but we can do it sometimes. So we're thinking, this relationship takes so much work. Like I had to do this. But when we were dating, look at all the things you have to do. You have to go on all the dating apps. You have to try to find someone. You have to look really good. You have to figure out whether you want a coffee or a dinner. You have to, there's a lot that goes into dating. And I think some of the container of dating is the fantasy that we put around it, the promise that we're going to be given. And I think we forget to continue dreaming in our relationships. Esther Perel says that women, statistically, are the people who get bored in relationship first. And I would have thought men. But she says it's because they lose their sense of narrative and they have something to tell themselves when they first start dating. Now, that's probably social conditioning too, and maybe has something primordial to it. But I think we need to re-narrate, continue to allow each other to change or be aware of our needs, but definitely continue the dreaming and even fantasy about what our life with our current partner can be.
I'm curious, in a situation like this with a couple, is there ever a situation where you would suggest this, one of you in this couple has these fantasies, you need to consider opening your marriage up and allowing this person to explore those with other people?
Yeah, I would never use the word need. Sometimes I feel like how the conversation is happening and the worries around it, I think don't allow the truth to come out. And I think it's easy to dream, just like Margot found out as she had to eat a little bit of crow at the end because it had some promises and she wasn't aware of the losses that she was going to have, right? So I would have a couple maybe talk about that, but I don't promise to keep people together either. I think once you look at the setup of their family roles, their family of origin, and the grids of their sexuality, you have a lot more information with which to know what direction to take. I don't go there quickly. And sometimes this is why people take breaks. I think those are really gracious moments when partners say, do you want 3 months? I can't be a part of that. I'm hurting. And then there's kind of an equal risk there because one person gets to experiment, but the other person might not be there at the other end. Yeah, there's a lot of beautiful ways. And I know we look at it sometimes as a binary, but it's a whole spectrum. I know a lot of marriages over 20 years, they've opened for 2 months out of 10 every decade, and so there's many ways to do it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know that I would bring it up myself, but certainly if they brought it up. I think there's conversations to be had at the very least around why is sex the dividing line between faithfulness and unfaithfulness? And just like you as a couple, work that out. Why is that the thing? Yeah. That's in our society, that's the line. So let's not just adopt what everyone else is doing. Why for you, if that is the line, why is that the line? And make at least some agreements, story around this is why this is a line for us. I think I would unpack that because there's just so many things we just kind of fall into because that's how it's always done. But a lot of people cheat on their partners. So something is going on there, despite having this sort of social agreement that this is the line. A lot of people are crossing that line. So I would like to shine a light on it and have a conversation around, is that your line? That's fine. Let's talk about why that is your line and what the values the two of you might share around that line.
Well, and it's very cultural, right? Because if you go to Europe, they might be like, I don't know why I'm picturing France, but like, don't break up your family. Like, be a man and like go find yourself a side piece because, or, you know, try infidelity. Don't break up your family. And in this kind of the US and Canada, the attitude's a bit more like, how dare you cheat? You're breaking up your family. Go find your authenticity, your independence, but don't ruin the sanctity of the whole. So there's so many different attitudes towards that as well.
Any last thoughts on Take This Waltz? Would you recommend it?
So touched. I just love this movie. I thought it was really cute because Sarah Polley's like, how come she's like, I keep getting asked, the film got defined as nationalistic. And she's like, that's what happens in Canadian film. You put it in a city in your own country and they think it's a statement on Canada. She's like, that's just where Canadian film is, you know? I wanted to add that because I thought it was really interesting. So I like the film as a Canadian because of the cast and where it's set. I think it's a beautiful kind of misty glorification of one of our cities. I'm curious what we would do with Winnipeg, you know, or like whatever. But I love this film. I think it's profound. She said that she was reading a lot of Buddhism and at the time, and she was really curious about this gap that she found in our ability to be happy in terms of embracing suffering in that Buddhist concept. And I think the film stands up to it all and helps us all pre-reflect on our decisions about intimacy. I just think it's a total gem. What are you left with?
I agree. I think Sarah Polley is a really interesting person and artist. I'm really grateful she made this film. I think it's a great springboard, like our conversation, for couples and people just to talk through desires, marriage, monogamy, relationships. You know, I would say from my own experience, maybe carve out a little space afterwards if you're seeing it with a partner.
Good point.
To either say we'll talk about it tomorrow or later tonight. It might be a little raw. If, like me, it affects you quite a bit because it could bring up some things that would be triggering or hard to talk through. But yeah, worth seeing. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please remember to rate, review, and follow, and please share the podcast to anyone you think would enjoy it. Remember to click the link in the show notes to take my Hidden Relationship Patterns quiz to receive your personalized ebook to start improving your relationships today. And reach out if you need support. Thanks for listening. See you next time.